Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood dripped onto the marble floor. It wasn't much, just a single, crimson bead, but against the pristine white of the academy hallway, it looked like a gunshot wound. Julian stared at the droplet, his breath hitching in his chest, his hands instinctively flying to cradle his abdomen. The hallway of the St. Ethelgard Institute for the Gifted spun dizzily around him. He wasn't bleeding from a wound. The blood had come from his lip, split open when his shoulder was slammed into the lockers. The metallic taste in his mouth was nauseating, compounded by the morning sickness he had been fighting to suppress for 3 hours. He was cornered, trapped between the cold steel of the lockers and the 3 towering figures casting long shadows over him. They were betas, wealthy sons of senators and corporate moguls, and they smelled of expensive cologne and cruelty. But they weren't the ones in charge. They were just the wall. The true threat stood in front of them, sneering. "Look at him," Silas drawled, leaning in close enough that Julian could smell the cloying sweetness of wine on his breath, despite it being midday. Silas was a lower-tier alpha, possessed of too much money and not enough discipline. Pale as a ghost, always sick, always wearing those oversized sweaters. "You aren't fooling anyone, charity case." Julian pressed his back harder against the metal, his knuckles white as he clutched his stomach. "Let me pass, Silas. Pass." Silas laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed in the empty corridor. "You think you have the right to walk these halls? You're an omega from the gutters, Julian. And now, you're a tainted one. I can smell the change in your hormones from here. It's sour. Disgusting." He reached out, his hand hovering dangerously close to Julian's midsection. Julian flinched, a primal spike of fear shooting through his veins. It wasn't fear for himself. It was a terrifying, biological imperative to protect the life growing inside him. "Don't touch me," Julian hissed, his voice trembling but his eyes fierce. "Or what?" Silas sneered. "Who is going to stop me? That deadbeat father? Oh, that's right. You don't have a mate. You're just a slut who got knocked up by some gutter rat and thinks he can still attend classes with the elite." Silas's hand grabbed the collar of Julian's sweater, yanking him forward. "Tell us who the mongrel is, Julian. Confess, and maybe we won't petition the headmaster to have you expelled for moral indecency. Get your hands off him." The voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. It was a low, resonant baritone that seemed to drop the temperature of the hallway by 10 degrees instantly. It was a voice that commanded absolute, biological obedience. The 3 betas stiffened, their eyes widening in panic. Silas froze, his hand still gripping Julian's collar, but the sneer fell from his face, replaced by a pale mask of terror. Standing at the end of the corridor was Cassian Valerius. He was the definition of the cold alpha. Standing 6'3", with hair the color of midnight and eyes like shattered ice, Cassian was the heir to the Valerius conglomerate, the family that practically owned the city, the government, and this institute. He wore the black and gold uniform of the student council president, every button fastened, every line sharp. He was beautiful in the way a glacier is beautiful, breathtaking, distant, and capable of crushing anything in its path. Cassian walked toward them. His steps were slow, rhythmic, the sound of his dress shoes on the marble echoing like a war drum. He didn't look at Julian. His icy gaze was fixed solely on Silas's hand. "Lord Valerius," Silas stammered, quickly releasing Julian and stepping back, wiping his hand on his trousers as if he had been burned. "We were just enforcing standards. This omega is." "I didn't ask for a report," Cassian said, stopping 3 feet away. The sheer pressure of his aura, his pheromones, began to fill the space. It was the scent of ozone, frozen pine, and something darker, like gunpowder. It was suffocating. The betas were already trembling, heads bowed, exposing their necks in submission. Cassian looked at Silas with an expression of utter boredom mixed with lethal intent. "I despise noise, Silas. And you are very loud." "I apologize, my lord," Silas squeaked, bowing low. "We will leave. Go." Cassian dismissed them without a wave, just a cold word. As the bullies scrambled away, tripping over themselves to escape the crushing pressure of the prime alpha, silence returned to the hallway. Julian slumped against the lockers, his legs finally giving out. He slid down to the floor, exhaling a shaky breath, his hands still protective over his stomach. He waited for Cassian to walk away. That was their routine. In public, they were strangers. Cassian was the prince of the academy, and Julian was the scholarship student from the wrong side of the tracks. They existed in different worlds. But Cassian didn't walk away. He stood there for a moment, listening until the footsteps of the bullies had completely faded. Then, the mask cracked. The cold, imperious posture vanished, replaced by a tension that looked painful. Cassian dropped to one knee in front of Julian, his movements frantic. "Julian," Cassian breathed, his voice rough, stripped of its icy veneer. He reached out, his large hands hovering over Julian, afraid to touch him, afraid he was already broken. "Did he hurt you? Did he touch the child?" Julian looked up, meeting those ice-blue eyes that were now burning with a terrified, desperate heat. "I'm okay, Cass. He grabbed my collar. I'm okay." Cassian let out a growl, a low rumble that vibrated deep in his chest. He gently took Julian's face in his hands, his thumbs caressing the bruised cheekbone. "I should have killed him. I should have torn his throat out right here." "You can't," Julian whispered, leaning into the touch, drawing strength from his mate's scent. "Your father. The election. If you lose your temper now, if they find out about us." "I don't care about the election," Cassian hissed, his forehead resting against Julian's. "I care that my pregnant mate is being tormented by insects while I have to stand there and pretend I don't know him. It's killing me, Julian. Every day, it's killing me." "It's only for 2 more weeks." Julian soothed him, though his own heart was breaking. "Graduation. Once you have the inheritance, once the board confirms your position as CEO, they can't touch us. We just have to hold on." This was the secret that weighed heavier than the child growing in Julian's womb. Cassian Valerius, the untouchable ice prince, was not only Julian's lover, he was his fated mate. But their love was a death sentence. The Valerius family was obsessed with blood purity and political alliances. Cassian was already betrothed to a high-ranking Omega from a rival corporation, a merger worth billions. If Cassian's father, the ruthless Duke Valerius, knew that his son had mated with a penniless nobody and impregnated him, Julian would disappear. Accidents happened all the time. To survive, they had constructed a wall of lies. Cassian played the cold, indifferent leader. Julian played the invisible victim. And the baby was a ticking clock. "Can you stand?" Cassian asked softly, his eyes scanning Julian's body for injuries. "I think so." Cassian helped him up, his grip firm but incredibly gentle. For a split second, he pulled Julian into a crushing embrace, burying his face in Julian's neck, inhaling his scent, vanilla and distress. "I swear to you," Cassian whispered into his skin, "once I have the power, I will burn the world down for you. No one will ever look at you with anything but reverence again." He pulled away abruptly as the bell rang. The mask of ice slammed back into place. Without another word, Cassian turned and walked away, leaving Julian alone in the cold hallway, clutching the promise to his chest like a shield. The weeks that followed were a blur of nausea, fear, and exhaustion. Julian's pregnancy was becoming harder to hide. His scent was changing, sweetening, becoming milky and rich, the unmistakable scent of a carrying Omega. He doused himself in scent blockers until his skin burned, and he wore layers of clothes that made him sweat in the humid spring heat. The bullying intensified. Emboldened by Cassian's apparent indifference, for Cassian never intervened directly again, fearful of exposing them, Silas and his group grew vicious. They tripped Julian in the cafeteria. They vandalized his textbooks with slurs. They whispered that he was carrying a bastard that should be fixed. Julian bore it all in silence. He kept his head down, focused on his studies, and lived for the stolen moments. The midnight rendezvous in the abandoned library wing. The brief, cryptic texts on a burner phone. The feeling of Cassian's hand on his stomach in the dark, feeling the first flutters of life, while the alpha wept silently, apologizing for his cowardice. "It's not cowardice," Julian would tell him, running his fingers through Cassian's silk-soft hair. "It's strategy. You are the wolf waiting to spring the trap. I can be strong for a little longer." But the trap was sprung sooner than they expected, and not by them. It was the night of the winter solstice gala, the most important event of the year. It was a formal masquerade where the city's elite gathered, and where Cassian was scheduled to officially announce his engagement to the heir of the rival Sterling family. It was also the night Cassian planned to launch his coup, using evidence of his father's embezzlement to force the board to oust the Duke and install Cassian immediately. Julian wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be safe in his dorm. But a summons had come, forged with the dean's signature, demanding his presence as a scholarship representative. He knew it was a trap, but refusal meant expulsion, and expulsion meant losing the student visa that kept him in the city, safe from his own abusive relatives back home. So Julian went. He wore a simple black suit, ill-fitting to hide his waist, and a plain white mask. He stuck to the shadows of the grand ballroom, watching the glittering crowd. He saw Cassian across the room, looking devastating in a white tuxedo, standing beside his father and his fiancée. Cassian looked miserable, his eyes scanning the crowd, restless. Suddenly, the music stopped. The spotlights swiveled to the center of the room. Silas stood on the grand staircase, holding a microphone in one hand and a manila folder in the other. He wasn't wearing a mask. He looked manic, drunk on power. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas boomed. "Distinguished guests. Tonight, we celebrate the future of the Valerius line. But before we toast to the Union of the Year, I think we should address a rot in our beloved academy." A murmur went through the crowd. Cassian stiffened, his gaze snapping to Silas. "We pride ourselves on excellence," Silas continued, pacing the landing. "On purity. Yet, walking among us is a parasite. A whore who has defiled the sanctity of this institution." He pointed a finger straight into the shadows, directly at Julian. The spotlight followed, blinding him. Julian froze, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Julian Thorne," Silas shouted. "Step forward." Two security guards, clearly paid off, grabbed Julian by the arms and dragged him into the center of the floor. They threw him down at the base of the stairs. Julian gasped, curling around his stomach instinctively. "This creature," Silas announced, waving the folder, "is pregnant. An unmarried and bonded Omega, carrying a bastard child. I stole his medical records from the infirmary this morning. He is 4 months along." The crowd gasped. Whispers of disgraceful and scandalous rippled through the room. "But that's not the worst part," Silas grinned, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Tell them, Julian. Tell them who the father is. Is it the janitor? A drug dealer? Or perhaps—" Silas laughed, looking up at the balcony where the Duke and Cassian stood. "Perhaps he doesn't even know. Because that's what trash does." "Enough." The Duke's voice was like thunder. He stepped to the railing, looking down at Julian with pure disgust. "Remove this filth from my sight. Expel him, and ensure the child is dealt with. We cannot have such immorality infecting the student body." "No," Julian cried out, struggling as the guards hauled him up. "Please, wait." The single word cut through the chaos like a blade. Cassian moved. He didn't walk. He descended the stairs like a deity of vengeance. He ignored his father's shout. He ignored his fiancée's gasp. He walked straight to the center of the floor. Silas smirked at him. "Ah, Lord Valerius. Coming to take out the trash yourself?" Cassian didn't answer. He stopped in front of Julian. The guards, sensing the lethal aura radiating from the Alpha, released Julian and backed away. Julian stumbled, and Cassian caught him. For the first time in public, Cassian held him. He wrapped one arm securely around Julian's waist and placed the other hand, large and warm and possessive, directly over Julian's pregnant belly. The room went deathly silent. Cassian looked up, his eyes glowing with a feral, terrifying gold, the sign of an alpha pushed to the brink. He looked at Silas. "You asked who the father is," Cassian said, his voice calm, but terrifyingly loud in the silence. I did," Silas stammered, his smirk faltering as he saw the hand on the stomach. "You called my child a bastard," Cassian continued, stepping closer, dragging the terrified Silas into his orbit. "You called my maid a whore." The collective gasp of the crowd sucked the air out of the room. The Duke gripped the railing so hard the wood splintered. "Cassian, what are you saying? Step away from that boy immediately." Cassian turned his head slowly to look at his father. "No, I forbid this," the Duke roared. "You are betrothed. You are the heir." "I am the heir," Cassian agreed. "And this He pulled Julian closer, nuzzling his nose against Julian's temple, publicly scent-marking him in front of 300 witnesses. This is my soulmate, and he is carrying the next head of the house of Valerius. He turned his gaze back to Silas. And you laid hands on him. Silas fell to his knees. My lord, I didn't know. Please, you made him bleed, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the hall. I smelled it on him weeks ago. You terrorized him. You made him afraid to walk the halls of my territory. Cassian released Julian gently, positioning him behind his back, shielding him completely from the crowd. Then, Cassian advanced on Silas. I told you I despise noise, Silas. But do you know what I despise more? Cassian grabbed Silas by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one hand. Silas clawed at the air, choking. I despise anyone who touches what is mine. Cassian threw Silas aside like a rag doll. The bully skid across the floor, crashing into a table of champagne flutes. Cassian didn't even watch him fall. He turned to the crowd, his pheromones exploding outward in a wave of dominance that forced every alpha in the room to lower their eyes. Listen well, Cassian roared. Julian Thorne is my mate. He is the future consort of this house. Anyone who speaks a word against him, anyone who looks at him with anything less than absolute respect, answers to me. He looked up at the balcony, locking eyes with his father. And if anyone has a problem with the legitimacy of my heir, they can challenge me for the seat of the Primus right now. It was a challenge to the death. In the old laws, still respected by the elite, a challenge for leadership could be issued at any time. The Duke looked at his son, at the raw, unbridled power radiating from him, and realized he had already lost. Cassian wasn't a boy anymore. He was a king who had found his queen, and that made him invincible. The Duke paled, stepped back, and turned away. The challenge was declined. The torch had passed. Cassian turned back to Julian. The golden glow faded from his eyes, replaced by the familiar ocean blue, now swimming with tears. He ignored the hundreds of people watching. He cooped Julian's face. I'm sorry, Cassian whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry I made you wait. I'm sorry you had to be alone. Julian smiled, tears streaming down his face, washing away the fear of the last few months. He placed his hand over Cassian's hand, still resting on his stomach. You came, Julian whispered. You always come. Cassian leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a claiming, a seal, a promise. When they broke apart, Cassian swept Julian up into his arms, carrying him bridal style. Where are we going? Julian asked, burying his face in Cassian's shoulder. Home, Cassian said, stepping over the broken glass, walking through the parting crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. We're going home. And tomorrow, I'm going to reshape this entire world so it's worthy of you. As they exited the ballroom, leaving a stunned silence in their wake, Julian looked back over Cassian's shoulder. He saw Silas being dragged away by security. He saw the elites whispering, terrified. But mostly, he saw the way they looked at Cassian's back, with fear and with awe. The cold alpha had melted, but only for one. And for that one, he had become a dragon. And that is how the silent lamb brought the empire to its knees, simply by holding the heart of the beast. If you enjoyed seeing Cassian destroy his enemies to protect his lover, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have kept the secret to protect your lover, even if it meant enduring hell alone? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,